Imagine an elite university town where your mind is literally a cryptocurrency. You can extract your memories, trade them, or sell them to pay off your student loans. In this world, we follow Lyra Vance, a brilliant, cynical coder looking for her missing sister. But when she hacks into her sister's drive, she doesn't find a journal. She finds a live video feed. It's part 2. If you haven't watched first part, go for it first. Link is in description. Now, grab your neural cartridges, override your firewalls, and let's dive into the fractured Codex. Part 2. The entrance to the funhouse was a gaping, grotesque clown mouth, its painted teeth peeling and stained with black mold. The pink and cyan neon from the plaza caught the wet contours of the plastic face, making it look like it was laughing in silent, agonizing slow motion. "I don't like this," Kalen muttered, his pistol leveled as they crossed the threshold. The power signature running this place isn't from a standard auxiliary generator. It's too clean. It feels like a corporate-grade local grid hidden right under our noses. "Julian built it," Lyra said, her hand resting on her pack where the violet core drive sat heavy against her spine. She always said the best place to hide an active server loop was inside a dead zone. The city's automated scanning sweeps just bypass it entirely. The interior of the funhouse was a labyrinth of warped mirrors and narrow plywood corridors. The calliope music from outside was a muffled, rhythmic thudding against the walls. As they walked past the reflective glass, Lyra's reflection distorted, stretching her body, twisting her face into monstrous proportions. But as she passed the 5th mirror, she stopped dead. In the reflection, she wasn't alone. Standing directly behind her was a small girl with a bright yellow raincoat and short, dark hair. The girl was holding a tiny tin robot with a broken wing. Lyra spun around, her heart jumping into her throat. "Who's there?" The narrow corridor was completely empty. There was only Kalen, his face drawn with tension, looking at her with deep concern. She looked back at the mirror. The little girl in the yellow raincoat was gone, replaced by the distorted image of her own adult face, wet with rain and pale with fear. "What you see inside isn't a memory," Julian's warning echoed in her head. "It's a blueprint." "The floorboards," Lyra whispered, looking down at the warped, water-damaged wooden planks beneath her boots. Julian said to enter the funnel. She knelt, her fingers hunting along the seams of the wood. In the center of a room surrounded by a circle of cracked mirrors, she found a structural anomaly. A perfectly straight geometric seam in the floor that didn't match the chaotic rot of the rest of the building. It was a hidden latch, masked by an optical camouflage paint coat that had begun to flake away. She pressed her thumb against a small, rough knot in the wood. A soft, pneumatic hiss cut through the damp air. A 4-foot section of the floor clicked and swung downward, revealing a steep vertical ladder that plummeted into a well-lit, sterile concrete shaft. The smell of damp earth and rust was instantly replaced by the sharp, clinical scent of filtered air, isopropyl alcohol, and high-end server coolant. "This is no carnival trick," Kalen said, peering into the hole. "That's military-grade ventilation down there." They climbed down the ladder, descending 20 feet beneath the foundations of the abandoned park. At the bottom, the shaft opened into a vast, subterranean laboratory that looked like a mirror image of the high-security research facilities at the Synapse Institute. But this one was clandestine, built into an old industrial storage vault. Rows of processing units hummed with a deep, powerful resonance, their indicator lights flashing in a complex, synchronized rhythm. In the center of the vast room stood a raised circular platform, surrounded by a ring of diagnostic monitors that flickered with active biological readouts. Lyra walked toward the platform, her boots clicking softly against the pristine, white-tiled floor. Resting in the dead center of the stage was a towering cylindrical glass chamber filled with a thick, translucent, glowing blue nutrient fluid. Bubbles rose lazily from the base, illuminated by internal fiber optic lines. Lyra approached the glass, her eyes wide, her breath fogging the polished surface. Floating suspended within the blue fluid was a body. It was a young woman, her dark hair drifting around her face like seaweed, her eyes closed in a deep, medically induced stasis sleep. She was entirely unaugmented. No visible neural ports, no cybernetic lines, her skin smooth and unmarred. Lyra staggered backward, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The woman inside the glass stasis pod didn't just look like her. It was a flawless, identical, organic match. It was a perfect clone of Lyra Vance, its chest rising and falling in a slow, simulated respiratory cycle. "Kaylin," Lyra choked out, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the syllables. "Kaylin, look at the pod." Kaylin stepped up to the edge of the platform, his weapon lowering as his face drained of all color. He looked from the body in the glass to the real Lyra standing beside him, his mind visibly struggling to compute the variable. What kind of research was Julian really doing down here? Before Lyra could answer, the central diagnostic terminal beside the pod chirped, its display screen flaring to life with a bright, aggressive amber light. A video playback sequence initialized automatically, a prompt appearing across the screen in bold, system-level font. Local file discovery, recovery, log ZO511. Author, Voss, Kaylin. File type, full consciousness extraction, phase 01. Status, verified. The screen flickered, and a high-resolution video began to play. The recording environment was this exact underground lab. On the screen, a girl lay strapped to an operating table beside the glass stasis pod. It was Lyra, her eyes vacant, her arms pinned by heavy leather restraints. Standing over her, holding a massive, gleaming neural extraction syringe with an active violet core, was Kaylin. On the video feed, the digital version of Kaylin looked directly at the camera, his face cold and entirely devoid of the warmth he had shown her over the last 24 hours, and spoke clearly to someone off-camera. "The extraction is stable. The core identity is ready for download into the shell. Thorn will be pleased." The video played on a relentless loop, the audio of Kaylin's digitized voice bouncing off the sterile concrete walls of the subterranean lab. "The core identity is ready for download into the shell. Thorn will be pleased." Lyra scrambled backward, her heels skidding against the white tile floor. Her hand flew to her pack, her fingers closing around the grip of the data spike. She pulled it free, the prongs sparking to life with a fierce, blinding blue hiss that illuminated the terror in her eyes. "Lyra, wait, stop," Kaylin cried, throwing his hands in the air, his pistol clattering to the floorboards as he stepped back. "That video, it's a deepfake or a corrupt file. You know me. You know I've been running with you from the start." "I don't know anything," Lyra screamed, her voice cracking with a raw, agonizing betrayal. "The tracker led to your house. The auction buyout used your signature, and now I'm looking at a security log of you harvesting my brain for the Dean." "Think about the timeline, Lyra," Kaylin pleaded, his eyes wide, his chest heaving as he maintained his open palm posture. "Look at the timestamp on that video file. May 11th. That was a week ago. If I stripped your mind and handed it to Thorn a week ago, who am I running with right now? Who are you?" Lyra's breath hitched, the logical framework of her coder's brain fighting against the sheer panic coursing through her veins. She lowered the spike by a fraction of an inch, her gaze darting from Kaylin's desperate face to the video screen, then to the silent floating clone inside the glowing blue stasis chamber. "Isolate the terminal variables," she muttered to herself, her survival mechanism kicking in. "Look at the data architecture." She lunged toward the central console, keeping the humming data spike leveled at Kaylin with one hand while her other flew across the physical keyboard. She forced the video playback windows down into the root system directory, bypassing the user interface to look at the raw system telemetry logs behind the file. The machine whirred, its cooling lines pulsing a deep amber as it processed her query. System telemetry. Expansion, file Ordo 511. Encryption routine, stage 4, Vance sync. Data source, external intercept, proxy replicant. Log entry. Original access code, auth Dean. Thorn Lyra's fingers froze on the keys. The file hadn't been recorded by this laboratory's internal cameras. It was an outbound data packet that had been intercepted from the Synapse Institute's central network tower and mirrored here. "It's an injection script," Lyra whispered, her anger turning into cold horror. "Thorn didn't record this here. He broadcasted it to this terminal. He knew we would come to this park. He knew we would find this lab." "He planted it," Kalen said, letting out a long, ragged breath as he lowered his hands, his shoulders sinking with relief. "A psychological logic bomb. He wanted you to turn on me, Lyra. He wanted you to neutralize the only person who can help you access the core." Before Lyra could apologize, the terminal's automated diagnostic routine finished parsing the deeper data layers of the clone's life support systems. The monitor flashed a warning sign, a rhythmic, low-frequency chime beginning to echo through the lab. "Critical alert. Local perimeter defense bypass. Intercept signature. Extrinsic overwrite command. Initiating local system compilation. 92% complete." The glass stasis pod in the center of the room flared with a sudden, violent golden light. The translucent blue fluid inside began to churn rapidly, bubbles clouding the glass as the automated systems began to drain the nutrient solution at high pressure. The body inside the pod shifted. Her fingers twitched against the glass, her eyelids fluttering. Upward. Lyra watched in absolute fascination and horror as the clone's eyes opened fully. They weren't the normal, organic brown of her own eyes. They were a brilliant, luminescent gold, glowing with an active, high-density wireless data stream that was uploading directly into her cortex from an untraceable source. The clone raised her right hand, pressing her wet palm flat against the interior glass of the pod, directly matching the position where Lyra's hand had rested on the outside. A digital text display appeared across the surface of the glass chamber, written in a sharp, corporate-grade font that Lyra had seen only once before, on the secure monitors inside Dr. Alistair Thorne's office. The text on the glass read, "Replicant sequence synchronization complete. Target identity, Vancil core, retrieval protocol active, prepare for local termination." Behind them, the heavy hydraulic blast doors at the entrance of the subterranean vault slammed shut with a deafening metallic roar, the electronic locking mechanisms fusing together under a sudden blinding surge of high-voltage currents. The sound of the hydraulic blast doors fusing shut was like the firing of a cannon in the enclosed concrete bunker. "Lyra, back away from the glass," Kalen shouted, diving to the floor to retrieve his dropped pistol. The gold-eyed clone inside the pod didn't blink. Her wet palm remained pressed against the interior glass, the luminescent data stream behind her pupils cycling at a terrifying hyperspeed rate. Across the lab, every single monitor flipped from the system logs to a synchronized blood-red display. System management, overwrite, detonation protocol 01. Core status, intruder containment initiated, thermal purge, active, cores EAR 1 Tumor 4, time to incineration 03.0. A thermal purge? Lyra gasped, her fingers flying across the terminal keys, trying to input an abort sequence. "That's not a security lockdown. That's an industrial self-destruct. The system is flooding the server bays with liquid thermite." "Thorn isn't trying to capture us anymore," Kalen said, running to the sealed blast doors. He checked the biometric panel. The plastic housing had melted into a solid lump of gray slag from the high-voltage surge. "He knows we have Julian's core drive. If he can't have it, he's willing to burn this entire sector to ash to make sure we don't keep it." "I can't override the command," Lyra yelled over the sudden deafening roar of the facility's auxiliary ventilation fans shifting into reverse. The air in the room instantly grew hot, the smell of ozone turning into a choking chemical heat. Time to incineration, 02:15. The clone inside the stasis pod began to thrash violently as the remaining blue fluid drained past her knees. The gold light in her eyes flickered, fracturing into lines of corrupted code. She wasn't an assassin. She was an organic hard drive, her brain being utilized as a physical receiver for the termination command. She was feeling the system burn before it even reached the room. "Lyra, the data spike," Kalen called out, pointing to the high-voltage tool still gripping her hand. "The blast doors are dead," but the primary conduit line for the server room's cooling system runs right through the upper structural ceiling. If you can short the fluid distribution valves, the fire suppression halon gas might blow the emergency pressure vents. That will cause a localized concussive explosion, Kalen. If the pressure doesn't vent outward, this whole room becomes a fragmentation grenade. Do you have a better idea? Because I'm currently sweating through my jacket and we have 90 seconds left to live. Lyra looked from Kalen to the thrashing clone, then up at the ceiling. A massive, insulated steel pipe marked with a high-pressure warning chevron ran across the concrete beam directly above the stasis platform. Isolate the logic, she told herself, climbing onto the edge of the terminal console. Calculate the vector. She extended the titanium prongs of her data spike to their maximum length. The tool whined, the blue sparks turning into a solid, blinding arc of electrical energy. She braced her boots against the console, balanced her weight, and drove the spike straight up into the junction box of the high-pressure cooling valve. A deafening bang rocked the lab. The data spike didn't just puncture the box, the high-voltage feedback exploded the tool entirely, throwing Lyra backward off the console. She hit the white tiles hard, the breath driven from her lungs as a geyser of super-chilled white halon gas and liquid nitrogen erupted from the ceiling pipe, hissing violently as it met the rapidly rising heat of the room. The world turned into a blinding, freezing fog. Lyra coughed, her skin blistering from the sudden extreme temperature shift. Through the white mist, she heard the structural concrete beams of the ceiling begin to crack under the intense thermal shock. Time to incineration, 00:45. Kalen! She screamed into the fog, blind, her hands sweeping across the floorboards to find her pack. Her fingers closed around the fabric. The violet core drive of Julian's mind was still intact, its light pulsing a stubborn, defiant blue through the smoke. I'm here. Kalen's voice came from the direction of the blast doors, followed by the sharp, metallic clink of him setting something heavy against the sealed frame. I found the emergency maintenance charge in the technician's locker. Get down, Lyra. Get flat. Lyra threw herself face down onto the tiles, wrapping her arms over her head. Through the roaring hiss of the escaping gas, a sharp, white-hot flash illuminated the fog, followed by an explosion that shattered every mirror in the funhouse above and tore the heavy fused blast doors completely off their tracks, throwing a wave of jagged concrete shrapnel into the dark corridor beyond. The explosion didn't just throw the blast doors off their tracks, it collapsed a 3-foot section of the reinforced concrete ceiling behind them. Lyra dragged herself through the choking mix of white halon gas and gray concrete dust, her skin stinging from the freezing spray of the severed cooling lines. Her ears were ringing with a sharp, high-pitched static whine. She looked back through the smoke toward the central platform. The glass stasis pod had shattered under the concussive force of the blast. The golden-eyed clone lay motionless among the shards of glass, the luminescent data stream behind her pupils finally fading into a dull, vacant gray. The thermal purge had failed to incinerate them, but the facility was dying, its structural ribs groaning as the upper layers of the abandoned amusement park began to settle into the hollow space below. Lyra! Come on, Kalen panted, his hand gripping her collar as he hauled her to her feet. He was covered in gray dust, his field bandage soaked through with fresh crimson from his reopened shoulder wound. They staggered through the ruined doorway, navigating the dark, tilted corridors of the subterranean vault. They climbed the structural ladder, pushing through the debris of the funhouse floorboards, and broke out into the freezing morning air of the neon nexus. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pale, watery dawn that bled through the heavy gray clouds. The pink and cyan neon lights of the park had died, the generator beneath their feet finally fried by Lyra's sabotage. The park was a graveyard once more, silent and dripping with saltwater mist. They collapsed into the wet mud beside a collapsed concession stand, 50 yards from the funhouse entrance. Lyra pulled her pack into her lap, her hands trembling as she unzipped it to check the violet core drive. The glass cylinder was smudged with soot, but the internal violet light was steady, pulsing like a slow, artificial heartbeat. We survived, Kalen wheezed, lying flat on his back in the mud, staring up at the gray sky. Thorn thinks we're ash. We have a ghost window, Lyra. We can vanish into the lower sectors, regroup, find a clean terminal. Before he could finish the sentence, a sharp, clear electronic chime cut through the quiet splash of the waves against the seawall. Lyra's body went rigid. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her personal phone. The device had survived the explosion, its screen flickering slightly but intact. The active data block that had masked her location was gone, fried by the EMP and the thermal purge. The screen was illuminating a live, incoming call. The caller ID displayed a sequence of digital characters that made Lyra's heart stop completely, the breath catching in her throat like a physical block. The name on the screen read, Vance. Margaret. That's a glitch, Lyra whispered, her voice failing her. That's an automated marketing script. It has to be. Lyra? Who is it? Kalen asked, sitting up with a groan, his eyes tracking her pale, terrified expression. My mother, Lyra choked out, her gaze locked on the flashing green icon. Kalen, my mother died 5 years ago. I was 15. I watched the emergency flatline on the hospital monitors after the corporate transport crash. I signed the digital cremation authorization myself. Don't answer it, Kalen said instantly, reaching his clean hand out toward the device. It's a phishing script. Thorne's people are using a voice synthesizer and old public records to trace your signal the second you open the line. If you slide that screen, they'll lock onto our GPS, coordinates within 3 seconds. Lyra looked from Kalen's warning gaze back to the phone. The green phone icon continued to pulse, a steady rhythmic invite that felt violently alive in the dead silence of the abandoned park. Don't trust your childhood. It never happened. The dying words of the extraction agent on the balcony echoed in her mind, a virus code rewriting her certainty. If her childhood farm was a beautiful line of synthetic programming, if she was registered as a patient in a high-security corporate ward at 10 years old, then who was the woman who had raised her? Who was the woman who had died in that hospital bed? Driven by a desperate, reckless hunger for the truth that overrode every instinct of survival, Lyra pulled her hand away from Kalen's reach. With a swift, decisive swipe of her thumb, she slid the green icon across the glass, activating the speakerphone option as she held the device out between them in the cold morning mist. The line opened with a crisp, high-definition pop of static. For 2 long, agonizing seconds, there was nothing but the sound of distant, digital air, the ambient hum of a massive server array running somewhere deep within the city grid. And then, a voice spoke. It wasn't a mechanical synthesizer or a choppy, digitized imitation. It was a warm, slightly raspy, melodic cadence that Lyra had heard in her dreams for half a decade. It was the exact voice that had sung her to sleep when she was a child, the voice that had taught her first lines of code at a fictional kitchen table. Hello, little bird, her mother's voice whispered through the speaker, crisp and entirely clear. I know you are confused. I know you are frightened. But you need to listen to me very carefully. The enforcers aren't tracking your phone, Lyra. They don't need to. They are tracking the code inside your mind, and you have exactly 60 seconds before Dr. Thorne executes a global network override. The wind off the sea died down, leaving the abandoned amusement park trapped in a suffocating, freezing silence. The warm, raspy voice of Margaret Vance hummed from the phone's tiny speaker, contrasting violently with the rusted wreckage around them. This is a ghost script, Kalen hissed, his hand hovering over the device, his thumb twitching as if he wanted to smash the glass himself. Lyra, hit the kill switch. It's a deep-level spoofing protocol. I've seen corporate algorithms mimic dead relatives to break a target's psychological defense. It's not a spoof, Lyra whispered, her fingers locking around the edges of the casing so tightly her nails turned white. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide, tracking the complex, multi-layered data encryption keys shifting at the top of the display. Look at the data stream, Kalen. That's a triple-braided Vance architecture. No corporate hacker can fake that syntax. It's her. Lyra, listen to me, the voice from the speaker urged, a faint, rhythmic clicking sound pacing behind her words. The unmistakable background hum of a massive, liquid-cooled processing cluster. There is no time for a firewall diagnostic. The entity you knew as Margaret Vance was indeed a biological human, and she did pass away 5 years ago in the corporate transport incident. But before her physical termination, Julian executed a complete deep brain synaptic harvest. A cold sweat broke out across Lyra's forehead. A mind dump before the crash? Yes, the voice replied calmly. I am an advanced, self-compiling artificial consciousness built entirely from her synthesized memory matrix. I am the digital matriarch of the Vance network. I was left dormant inside the Synapse Institute's legacy servers to act as a system failsafe, to act as your guardian. If you're a guardian, then tell me the truth, Lyra cried out, her voice cracking as she held the phone closer to her face, her tears dripping onto the glass. The extraction agent on the balcony, the medical records in Ward 4, they said my childhood never happened. They said the farm was a lie. If you're my mother, tell me where I spent my 10th birthday. The line went quiet for a fraction of a second, the ambient hum of the server array dropping into a lower, heavier frequency. The farm was a beautiful construct, little bird, the digital matriarch said softly, her synthesized tone laced with a profound artificial sorrow. A digital nursery designed to protect your delicate cognitive balance while your physical system stabilized. The agent didn't lie to you, Lyra. The biological woman named Margaret Vance only ever gave birth to one daughter, Julian. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The world around her seemed to tilt, the rusted shapes of the Ferris wheel and the funhouse blurring into a chaotic web of static. One daughter. Then who am I? What am I? You are Julian's greatest achievement, her mother's voice whispered through the speaker, every syllable hitting Lyra like a physical blow to her chest. 6 years ago, Julian realized that Dr. Thorne was planning to use her research to build a global psychological containment network, a system that could forcibly rewrite the memories and identities of the entire population to ensure corporate compliance. She knew she couldn't stop him alone, so she took her own core personality matrix, isolated her analytical genius, her coding skills, and her capacity for defiance, and she compiled them into a separate, independent digital consciousness. Kalen slowly backed away from Lyra, his eyes wide with absolute horror as his gaze locked onto her face, evaluating her with a terrifying new perspective. A synthetic personality downloaded into an organic shell. Precisely, the digital matriarch confirmed. Lyra, you are not Julian's sister. You are a highly advanced, sentient digital consciousness constructed by Julian herself, downloaded into a blank human proxy shell 5 years ago to act as an external backdoor into the Synapse infrastructure. You are a living encryption key. Before Lyra could scream, before her mind could reject the devastating logic of the revelation, the phone's display violently glitched. The warm green call interface shattered, replaced by an aggressive, flashing golden alert block that mirrored the text from the stasis pod. The voice of her mother fractured into a harsh metallic screech as the outbound connection was violently severed from the upper campus grid. External override signature detected. Target: Vancel Core, initiating local system compilation, rerouting neural frequency to Tower Main Core 1. A sudden, blinding pain exploded behind Lyra's eyes. She dropped the phone into the mud, her hands flying to her temples as she fell to her knees, a violent rush of raw, unencrypted corporate code screaming directly into her mind, forcing her organic eyes to glow a deep, brilliant, and terrifying gold. The pain wasn't a physical ache, it was a digital invasion. Lyra collapsed into the spongy turf of the abandoned plaza, her forehead pressed against the wet earth as millions of lines of raw, corporate syntax flooded her neural pathways. She could feel the data scratching at the edges of her conscious mind, a relentless army of commands trying to pack her thoughts into sterile, pre-formatted files. System overwrite command, runtime global codex. Ident found, Vancel Core. Target synchronization, 14%, 22%, 35%. Lyra, hold on! Kalen's voice sounded miles away, muffled by the digital roar in her head. He lunged through the mud, grabbing her shoulders and dragging her upright. Her head snapped back, and Kaelin flinched as he looked into her eyes. They were no longer brown. They were a brilliant, luminescent gold, the iris patterns shifting like the shutter of a digital camera as the data stream uploaded directly into her cortex. "I'm losing my parameters," Lyra choked out, her teeth chattering violently. Her hands clawed at the fabric of Kaelin's jacket. "The code. It's rewriting my core functions. It's deleting the farm, Kaelin. It's deleting my name." "I won't let it," Kaelin said, his face hardening with a desperate resolve. He dragged her back against the rusted base of a carnival game booth, shielding her from the biting sea wind. He opened his tactical pack and pulled out a sleek silver device, a localized neural stabilizer he usually used to save black market clients whose brains scrambled during a bad memory trip. "This is going to hurt," he muttered, pressing the device's multi-pronged gel pad directly against the base of her skull, right over the hidden neural interface she hadn't even known she possessed until 5 minutes ago. "Initializing cognitive counterscript. Freeze the buffers, Lyra. Think like a compiler." He slammed the activation switch. A violent jolt of blue electrical energy surged through Lyra's nervous system. She screamed, her spine arching off the ground as Kaelin's defensive script slammed into the corporate upload stream like a digital firewall. For 10 agonizing seconds, her mind was a battlefield where gold corporate data met blue black market code. Slowly, the blinding pain began to recede into a dull, throbbing ache. The golden glow in her eyes stabilized, stopping its frantic movement and settling into a steady, faint shimmer. Lyra slumped against Kaelin's chest, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She looked down at her hands. They were still shaking, but the data flooding had stopped. The variables had been contained. "Did it work?" Kaelin panted, his hands covered in cold sweat as he checked the stabilizer's readout screen. It held the perimeter," Lyra whispered, her voice sounding different, sharper, more precise, the emotional warmth of her childhood memories slightly dulled by the realization of what she actually was. "The upload is paused, but Kaelin, the corporate command stream didn't just try to delete me, it left something behind." She closed her eyes, looking inward. In the center of her mind, where the massive blocks of empty void space had been discovered during her diagnostic scan, a hidden line of programming had been activated by Thorne's global override signal. It was a backdoor tracking script, but it wasn't pointing out to Thorne. It was a loop created by Julian, a dormant subroutine designed to trigger only when the global Codex reached a critical compilation state. The script was executing a live, real-time telemetry feed, projecting a set of hyper-precise physical coordinates directly onto her visual cortex. Lyra opened her eyes, the faint golden shimmer flaring bright. "I know where she is, Kaelin. The signal didn't just broadcast from the university. It originated from a specific sub-level server vault." "The mainframe tower?" Kaelin asked, his hand dropping to his sidearm. "No," Lyra said, standing up, her movements suddenly carrying a smooth mechanical efficiency that mirrored Julian's. She adjusted her tactical pack, ensuring the violet core drive was secure against her spine. "She's inside the core, the deep-level lead-shielded bunker directly beneath the center of the Synapse Institute quad. Thorne has her wired into the main distribution grid. She's running the system, Kaelin. She is the system." She looked toward the northern horizon, where the massive glass and steel spires of the Upper University campus towered over the city like a corporate fortress. "The global update launches in 2 hours, Lyra said, her voice dropping into a cold, dangerous register. "If we don't breach the core and extract her primary consciousness before the runtime hits 100%, Julian Vance will be erased, and every human mind on this planet will become a corporate server." The upper campus of the Synapse Institute was a fortress of glass, steel, and invisible data. At 4:30 a.m., the central quad was dead silent, illuminated by the cold white glow of recessed floor lights that washed over the pristine marble walkways. High above, automated security turrets scanned the perimeter, their optical sensors sniffing the air for unauthorized biometric signatures or rogue wireless frequencies. "Perimeter is hot," Kaelin whispered, crouched behind the thick concrete base of a modern art sculpture at the edge of the plaza. He was wearing the blue overalls of a high-tier corporate maintenance technician, a forged digital identity badge pinned to his chest. His hacking rig was wired directly into a maintenance port hidden within the sculpture's base, tricking the campus grid into seeing them as a scheduled diagnostic team. Lyra stood beside him, her hair pulled back under a matching corporate cap, her face obscured by a low-profile dust mask. Beneath the visor of her cap, her eyes still carried that faint, stubborn golden shimmer, a constant reminder of the synthetic architecture humming beneath her skin. "The security grid is cycling every 40 seconds, Lyra said, her voice dropping into that new, hyper-precise cadence. She didn't need to look at Kaylin's hacking screen. She could feel the ambient data pulses of the campus network vibrating through her own neural interface, a faint static hum at the base of her skull. "The primary elevator to the core is locked down under a triple biometric protocol: retinal, fingerprint, and a live neural resonance check. I can spoof the retina and the print using the data we pulled from the dead agent in the workshop," Kaylin said, his fingers flying across his rig's manual keys. "But the neural resonance check requires a live, active Vance signature. If Thorne's system detects even a millisecond of variance in the frequency, the whole tower goes into an automated lockdown." "I'll handle the frequency," Lyra said simply. "Julian built my matrix from her own. If I open the buffers and let the system scan my core file, it will think I'm her." "Lyra, if you open those buffers, Thorne will instantly see your location on his master console," Kaylin warned, turning his head to look at her. "It's a beacon. He'll know exactly which elevator bank we're using." "Then we'll have to be fast," she said. Kaylin pulled the master bypass key from the maintenance port and nodded. They stood up, adopting the casual, slouched posture of tired third-shift workers, and walked across the wide, illuminated expanse of the marble quad toward the glass atrium of the mainframe tower. The automated glass doors recognized Kaylin's forged credentials and slid open with a soft, pressurized hiss. The interior air was freezing, heavily conditioned to keep the massive server banks on the upper floors from overheating. They bypassed the public reception desk, slipping through a maintenance door marked with a high-voltage warning sign, and entered the secure elevator bay. The elevator door was a solid slab of polished titanium, completely devoid of buttons or handles. In the center of the frame sat a sleek, black glass interface, the biometric scanner. "Step up," Kaylin muttered, pressing his hacking rig against the panel's auxiliary port to inject the stolen retinal and fingerprint data. The scanner flashed blue. "Biometric, phase 0102, verified. Initiating. Phase 03, neural resonance, frequency check. Warning, unregistered signature will trigger immediate core termination." A thin green laser beam shot out from the top of the interface, scanning a line across Lyra's brow. Lyra closed her eyes. Inside her mind, she reached for the digital firewall Kaylin had installed with the neural stabilizer. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered the defenses. She allowed the golden corporate code she had absorbed in the amusement park to surge forward, aligning her thoughts with the hyper-elegant syntax of the Vance Sync protocol. The base of her skull throbbed with a sudden searing heat. On the panel, the green laser shifted, flashing a rapid series of orange pulses as the system evaluated her consciousness, digging through her synthetic memory files to find the master encryption key. For 3 agonizing seconds, the elevator bay was dead silent. Lyra could hear the blood rushing through her ears, her heart slamming against her ribs. The scanner chirped, a clean, high-pitched tone of absolute compliance. "Neural signature verified. Vance J. Primary. Access granted to sub-level 04, the core." The heavy titanium doors slid back, revealing a dark elevator car lined with black sound-absorbing foam. They stepped inside, and the car instantly plummeted straight down into the earth, descending with a smooth, terrifying speed that made Lyra's stomach drop. When the doors opened at the bottom, they weren't in a standard corporate server room. They stepped out onto a narrow metal catwalk suspended over a vast, circular cavern that looked like a digital coliseum. Thousands of server blades lined the circular walls, their indicator lights forming a massive, swirling vortex of blinking white and violet fire. The sound of the cooling fans was a continuous, deafening roar that vibrated through the metal structure beneath their feet. In the dead center of the cavern, suspended by a web of heavy, insulated fiber optic cables that stretched to the ceiling, hung a massive, spherical glass chamber. "We're in," Kalen said, his weapon drawn as he led the way down the catwalk. But before they could reach the central platform, the white indicator lights on the surrounding server walls violently shifted, flaring a blinding uniform crimson. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the central platform, blocking their path. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The figure was Julian, wearing her oil-stained leather jacket, her dark hair pinned back. But her face was completely bloodless, her jaw rigid, and her eyes were entirely white, a milky, vacant void that glowed with the raw, terrifying power of the entire university mainframe running directly through her brain. Julian raised both hands, her cybernetic gauntlets crackling with arcs of high-voltage defensive energy, and her voice, when it spoke over the cavern's audio speakers, was a chorus of 1,000 digitized voices tracking their every movement. "Intruders detected," the sister firewall boomed, her vacant white eyes locking onto Lyra with lethal intent, "purging local anomalies immediately." The first arc of high-voltage energy ripped across the narrow metal catwalk, shattering the safety railing into a shower of white-hot iron sparks. "Get down!" Kalen roared, tackling Lyra to the grated deck as a second bolt scorched the air above their heads, leaving the sharp, blinding smell of ozone in its wake. Julian, or the corporate script that had hollowed out her mind, didn't move from the center of the platform. Her vacant white eyes tracked them with a terrifying, mechanical precision. She raised her left gauntlet, and the swirling vortex of thousands of server blades around the room shifted their pitch, the deafening roar of the cooling fans climbing into a high-pitched, agonizing scream. Local firewall action, overload routine. Target, unregistered wearable hardware, Tactical Pack 01. Status, extracting core drive via force sync. Inside Lyra's tactical pack, the violet cylinder containing the core dump of Julian's true personality began to vibrate violently. The glass casing grew searing hot against Lyra's spine, the internal batteries whining as the main core tower tried to forcibly download the data right through the fabric of the bag. "She's ripping the drive away from me," Lyra screamed over the roar of the servers, her hands clawing at the straps of her pack to keep it pinned to her body. "Kalen, I can't hold the encryption. The system is using her biological resonance to bypass my manual locks." Kalen crawled forward, his boots skidding on the grated metal walkway as he aimed his suppressed pistol at the central power conduit dangling directly above Julian's head. Pop, pop, pop. 3 rounds struck the heavy fiber optic junction box, but the bullets simply flattened against a translucent, humming electromagnetic shield that flared into life around her body. "It's a localized defense array," Kalen yelled back, dropping his empty magazine. "I can't break the physical barrier from here. Lyra, you have to talk to her. You're her duplicate. Use the frequency." Lyra forced herself upright, bracing her knees against the vibrating metal catwalk. She looked across the 30-foot drop at the glowing, white-eyed shell of her creator. "Jules!" Lyra cried out, her voice amplified by the cavern's natural acoustics. "Look at my matrix! Look at the files you gave me. I'm the little bird. I have Sparky." The figure of Julian froze. The crackling arcs of high-voltage energy around her gauntlets flickered, dropping in intensity by a fraction of a percent. The milky white void in her eyes wavered, a tiny fractured spark of organic brown trying to force its way to the surface of her iris. System alert. Syntactic conflation detected. Local user ident. Vance J primary. System ident. Vance L core. Match. Coefficient. 99.8%. Logical paradox. Sparky. Julian's mouth moved, her voice dropping the terrifying digital chorus for a brief, agonizing second, returning to the human, raspy cadence Lyra remembered from her childhood. The tin robot, with the broken wing. Lyra, no. I compiled you to run. Why did you come back to the farm? Because the farm isn't real, Jules, Lyra shouted, taking a slow, cautious step forward on the catwalk, her hands raised in an open, defensive posture. But we are. What Thorn is doing to you, what he wants to do to the city, we can stop it. I have your core drive right here. I have the analytical engine. Let me plug it in. Let me compile the true runtime. No, Julian gasped, her body violently shivering as the corporate mainframe fought to reassert control over her neural pathways. The golden lines of the global Codex code began to crawl across her skin like glowing neon veins, forcing her arms back into an aggressive targeting stance. The code. It's too deep, little bird. I can't eject the script. If you step onto this platform, the system will merge us. It will overwrite your core file with the corporate master key. Behind them, the titanium doors of the secure elevator bay groaned as the electronic locking mechanisms were overridden from above. Lyra spun around, her golden eyes flaring bright. On the elevator's primary digital display interface, a stylized corporate logo flashed in a slow, triumphant rhythm, the perfect, symmetrical eye embedded in a geometric web. The elevator car was ascending back to the surface to retrieve a deployment of elite containment enforcers, and according to the arrival timer scrolling across the screen, they had exactly 90 seconds before the catwalk became a dead-end corridor. We out of time, Kalen said, his face pale as he looked from the elevator display to the roaring vortex of servers. He reached out, his hand gripping Lyra's shoulder, his gaze locking onto her golden eyes with a fierce, absolute loyalty. Lyra, whatever you're going to do, do it now. I'll hold the door. Kalen didn't wait for her validation. He spun around, slamming his back against the titanium elevator frame, and opened fire into the dark shaft above. The suppressed cracks of his pistol bounced off the structural concrete as the mechanical whir of the arriving containment transport grew deafening. Lyra didn't look back. She turned toward the central platform, her movement stripping away the last vestiges of human hesitation. The golden code in her eyes stabilized into a blinding, continuous light. Forgive me, Jules, Lyra whispered. She sprinted down the final stretch of the metal catwalk, her boots hammering a rhythmic pattern against the iron grating. Julian's white eyes flared with a sudden defensive panic. The corporate overwrite script reasserted itself with a vengeance, the neon gold veins across her skin pulsing a violent, high-density rhythm. She raised both cybernetic gauntlets, summoning a massive, crackling wall of pure electrical energy across the threshold of the central platform. Containment initiated, the digital chorus boomed from Julian's lips, her human voice completely buried beneath the mainframe's roar. Purging replicant file now. Lyra didn't slow down. As she reached the edge of the catwalk, she unzipped her pack with one fluid motion, yanked the violet core drive of Julian's true personality from its mounts, and held it out before her like a shield. She leaped across the 5-foot gap, diving straight into the crackling wall of high-voltage defensive energy. The impact was a cataclysmic system shock. The electrical barrier ripped through Lyra's synthetic nervous system, short-circuiting her sensory dampeners, filling her visual cortex with millions of flashing, multicolored syntax errors. She could feel her compiled memories, the fictional farm, the smell of the rain in the lattice, the sound of Kalen's voice, flickering like failing neon tubes, ready to be deleted forever. But she kept her grip on the violet drive. As her body slammed onto the cold white tiles of the central platform, she drove the cylindrical glass and polymer pod straight into the main diagnostic port built into the base of Julian's stasis chamber. The violet core clicked into the mount with a sharp, heavy mechanical lock. Instantly, the entire subterranean cavern went dead silent. The roaring scream of the thousands of server cooling fans cut out completely. The crimson and gold lights on the walls vanished, plunging the digital coliseum into a profound, breathless darkness, illuminated only by the faint, pulsing blue aura of the newly connected core drive. Julian froze in mid-stance, her cybernetic gauntlets dropping limply to her sides. The crackling electrical shield dissolved into nothingness. For 2 long, agonizing seconds, the world held its breath. Then, a single sharp electronic chirp resonated from the central console, followed by a massive, blinding wave of pure white light that erupted from the stasis chamber, sweeping across the platform like a physical shockwave. Critical main console interaction. True Vance recompilation. Initiated core merge code. Detected Vance L Pulse Vance J to consciousness. Status. Synchronizing system parameters. Lyra felt her vision expand exponentially. She wasn't lying on the floor anymore. She was floating within a vast, infinite lattice of digital light. She could see every server blade in the university, every node in the city grid, every encrypted memory file stored within the global Codex infrastructure. And standing right beside her in the center of the white void was Julian. Her sister looked whole, her eyes the natural, warm brown of their shared origin, her expression no longer vacant or strained, but filled with a deep, proud serenity. "You did it, little bird," Julian said, her voice echoing clearly in the space between their synchronized thoughts. "You closed the loop." Are we deleting the network?" Lyra asked, looking down at her own hands, which were now composed of millions of lines of beautiful, self-compiling golden code. "No," Julian whispered, reaching out to take Lyra's hand. As their fingers met, the data streams of their independent matrices began to weave together, forming a flawless, unbreakable master encryption key. "We are taking it back. We are turning the cage into a mirror." Before the synchronization could reach 100%, a heavy mechanical thud shattered the silence of the physical cavern behind them. The elevator doors had opened. Lyra's consciousness snapped back into her physical body. She opened her eyes, now a brilliant, permanent blend of violet and gold, and looked toward the catwalk entrance. Standing at the threshold of the platform, his white synthetic skin gleaming under the emergency auxiliary lights, was Dr. Alistair Thorne. He held a high-caliber data suppression rifle leveled directly at Julian's heart, his perfect, symmetrical smile twisted into a mask of pure, corporate malice. "An elegant compile, Miss Vance," Thorne said, his baritone voice echoing off the silent server walls as his security team deployed around him. "But you forgot the most basic rule of system design. The administrator always carries a hardware override." The air in the core had grown thin and freezing, the silent server racks standing like towering monoliths in the dark. Dr. Alistair Thorne stepped forward, his polished Oxfords clicking rhythmically against the metal grating of the central platform. Behind him, 4 heavy armor enforcers advanced with tactical precision, their rifle sights painting geometric red matrices across Lyra's chest and Julian's motionless form. "You really are a magnificent piece of engineering, Lyra," Thorne said, his tone conversational, almost paternal, as he adjusted the high-caliber data suppression rifle in his grip. "Julian balanced your cognitive loads beautifully. The capacity for defiance, the instinct to run. It made you the perfect stress test for the system, but a backup copy can never out-privilege the system architect." "I'm not a backup copy anymore," Lyra said. She stood slowly, her movements smooth, her posture mirroring the absolute calm of the unified Vance network, humming within her. The violet and gold light in her eyes pulsed in sync with the central server core. "We're synchronized, Thorne. The master encryption keys are woven into my core files. If you fire that weapon, you corrupt the data. You destroy the global update." Thorne's smile didn't waver. He stopped 5 paces away, his gaze shifting to the physical core drive pulsing blue in the diagnostic port. "The global update is a software variable, Miss Vance," Thorne murmured. "But software can always be recompiled from the hardware level." He reached into his breast pocket with his free hand and pulled out a small, heavy obsidian token, the physical admin override key. The device was etched with a single, deeply recessed silver eye that glowed with a cold, independent power source. "This token bypasses the neural resonance layers entirely," Thorne said, holding it out between them. "It speaks directly to the root BIOS of the organic shells. I don't need your compliance to finalize the runtime. I just need your proximity. He pressed the center of the token. A sharp, high-frequency acoustic whine erupted from the device. It wasn't loud to the human ear, but to Lyra's synthetic nervous system, it was a concussive shockwave. Her knees buckled. She slammed into the white tiles, her hands clutching her head as her internal display monitors fractured into a chaotic storm of gold syntax warnings. Critical warning. Admin override detected. Injecting root privilege. Authorized by Dean. Thorn. Restricting local compilation runtimes. Initiating forced disconnect. Beside her, Julian let out a ragged, choked gasp, the human brown in her eyes instantly vanishing as the white void rushed back to fill her irises. The unified network they had built in the white void began to splinter, the golden lines of code stretching and tearing under the weight of Thorn's hard-coded authority. "Kaelin," Lyra choked out, her vision blurring as the system tried to pack her consciousness into an encrypted archive file. Through the static in her ears, she heard the sharp, frantic pop-pop-pop of Kaelin's pistol from the far edge of the catwalk. He was shooting from the shadows, trying to draw the enforcer's attention away from the platform. One of the heavy armor guards turned calmly, leveling a suppression turret toward Kaelin's position and firing a continuous, deafening burst that shredded the metal railing where he was hiding. Lyra heard a blunt, sickening thud, followed by the sound of Kaelin's hacking rig shattering against the floorboards. "No!" Lyra screamed, but her voice was muted by the system. Thorn stepped closer, his shadow falling over her as he leveled the suppression rifle directly at the base of her skull. The obsidian token in his hand was glowing a blinding uniform white now, its override routine at 99% completion. "The loop closes here, little bird," Thorn whispered, his finger tightening on the heavy steel trigger. "System reboot in 3, 2. Before the countdown could hit 0, the physical glass cylinder of the violet core drive, still locked into the stasis chamber's port, did something it had never been programmed to do. It didn't just flash or pulse. It cracked. The internal polymer plates inside the cylinder, containing the final unredacted memories of Julian Vance, intentionally overcharged their backup lithium cells. The violet light didn't fade. It turned a brilliant, blinding and localized white-hot purple as it initiated a manual, physical thermal meltdown of its own architecture. The sudden catastrophic energy spike didn't travel through the network software. It traveled down the physical copper grounding lines of the central platform, blowing every circuit breaker in the core simultaneously. The obsidian token in Thorn's hand violently exploded, its internal capacitor cooking off in a shower of sparks that scorched his white corporate suit and threw him backward off his feet. The blinding suppression fields vanished instantly. Lyra's mind snapped back into sharp, hyper-focused clarity as the admin override script died. She looked up through the white smoke to see Julian's hand reaching down toward her, her eyes completely clear, her expression fierce and awake. "The hardware back door, Lyra," Julian said, her voice a solid, real-world resonance that cut through the darkness. "Now, before the auxiliary power cycles back." Lyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed Julian's hand, stood up, and together they lunged toward the main console interface, their shared fingers slamming flat against the master keyboard to execute the final, uninterruptible Vance Sync runtime. The keys beneath their fingers felt freezing cold, but the data flowing through their synchronized touch was a roaring torrent of liquid fire. System transaction, unified Vance execution. Source, Vance L+, Vance J, master coupling. Destination, Tower Core Backbone, Global Net. Protocol, Runtime, Overwrite Alpha. "Hold the connection," Julian shouted over the sudden deafening wail of the facility's emergency sirens. The auxiliary power was already trying to cycle back, the crimson wall lights flickering like dying stars as the backup generators kicked in from the upper campus levels. Dr. Alistair Thorne was scrambling to his feet, his pristine white corporate suit scorched and blackened from the obsidian token's explosion. His face was no longer a mask of calm composure. His features were twisted into a snarl of pure, desperate rage. "Kill them!" Thorn roared, waving his hand toward his remaining enforcers. "Shatter the terminals! Do not let that packet leave the room!" The heavy armor guards leveled their weapons, the underbelly barrels of their rifles spinning up with a high-pitched, lethal hum. Pop, 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 pop. From the far darkness of the shattered catwalk, a series of wild, uneven shots rang out. Kalen was leaning heavily against a buckled structural beam, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side, blood dripping from his brow. He was firing his sidearm with his remaining hand, his bullets sparking off the armor plating of the enforcers, forcing them to swerve and split their fire. "Compile it, Lyra," Kalen choked out, his voice raw with pain as he drew their attention. "Hit the switch." Lyra didn't look back at him. She couldn't. If she severed her connection with Julian for even a millisecond, the bandwidth would drop, and the master key packet would fracture within the university routing tubes. Inside her mind, she was no longer looking at lines of text. She was staring at a massive geometric fortress of corporate programming, the global Codex. It was a beautiful, terrifying cage of black and gold ice that stretched across the entire digital horizon, its walls composed of the stolen memories and rewritten identities of millions of people. "We aren't breaking the walls, little bird," Julian's consciousness whispered within the shared void, her digital hand guiding Lyra's fingers to the final, deep-level execution keys. "We are melting them from the inside out." Together they slammed their palms flat against the master execution pads. Packet status, sent. Total network infusion, 100%. Injecting master syntax, Vance replicant core. Returning system root privilege to the edge nodes. For a fraction of a second, the entire core went violently, blindingly white. The thousands of server blades lining the circular walls didn't short-circuit or explode. Instead, their indicator lights shifted from the corporate crimson back to a brilliant uniform violet gold. The master key script didn't delete the global database. It shattered the administrative ownership protocols. It sent a localized, high-density data pulse down every network line, every fiber optic cable, and every satellite link connected to the Synapse Institute grid. Across the city of the Lattice, every terminal, every wristcom, and every corporate-grade neural implant flickered. The false memories, the synthetic anxieties, and the hard-coded compliance protocols installed by Dr. Thorne's division vanished like fog under a morning sun. People in the lower sectors stopped in the streets, their eyes clearing as their true childhoods, their true names, and their true identities rushed back into their minds like a tidal wave of clean water. Inside the subterranean bunker, the enforcers froze in mid-stride. The tactical targeting matrices projected inside their visors glitched out, replaced by a simple scrolling line of unencrypted root text. User authorization terminated. Their weapons dropped to their sides, the automated targeting loops completely dead. Thorne staggered backward, his hands flying to his temples as his personal, high-tier cognitive interface backfired under the sheer volume of the network-wide purge. The digital symmetry of his mind fractured, his golden corporate eyes fading into a dull, hollow gray. What have you done?" Thorne whispered, his voice cracking as he looked at them through the clearing smoke. "You've dismantled the architecture. You've left the grid completely open." "We gave them back their keys," Lyra said, her voice dropping into a steady, quiet resonance that filled the silent cavern. She slowly pulled her hand away from the terminal. The golden light in her eyes remained, but it was no longer a frantic, invasive glow. It was a calm, integrated part of her being. She looked beside her. Julian was smiling, her body leaning heavily against the console, her dark hair falling across her face. The violet core drive in the port below them was completely dark, its physical sacrifice finalized. "The loop is open, little bird," Julian whispered, her breath shallow but her spirit entirely whole. "We are no longer ghosts." Lyra turned her head toward the edge of the platform, her gaze searching through the shadows until she found Kalen. He was sitting on the grated deck, his empty pistol resting beside his boot, a weary, triumphant smile cutting through the blood and gray concrete dust on his face. The alarms had stopped, The cooling fans had returned to a low, peaceful hum. Outside, the first true light of dawn was breaking over the glass spires of the university campus, but down in the deep center of the earth, the true runtime had finally begun. 3 weeks after the core went quiet, the rain returned to the lattice. It wasn't the thick chemical downpour that usually choked the low-tier industrial zones, but a clean, steady mist that washed the soot from the neon signs and collected in pristine puddles along the cracked concrete of the southern docks. Lyra stood at the rail of an old, unnetworked cargo barge, her collar turned up against the cold morning wind. Beneath the brim of her dark cap, her eyes caught the reflection of the gray sea, no longer flashing with the frantic golden telemetry of a corporate asset, but glowing with a steady, deep violet gold clarity. "The routing tubes through Sector 4 are completely open," Kalen said, stepping up to the rail beside her. He looked different without his tailored corporate blazers. He wore a heavy, oil-stained mechanic's coat, his left arm supported by a sleek, low-profile cybernetic brace that hummed with a quiet, efficient rhythm whenever he moved his fingers. He handed her a steaming plastic cup of synthetic coffee, his face free of the drawn, paranoid tension that had defined his life in the university grid. "No administrative blocks?" Lyra asked, taking the cup, the warmth bleeding through the plastic into her fingers. "None," Kalen said, a quiet smile touching his lips as he looked out at the city skyline. "The Synapse Institute is still there, but the towers are just glass and steel now. Without the master administrative keys, Thorne's division couldn't hold the network together. The board of directors fractured into a dozen competing factions within 48 hours of the purge. And Thorne? Last I heard from the underground boards, he's still locked in a high-security psychiatric ward in the upper sectors," Kalen murmured. His personal cognitive interface took too much feedback when the core synchronized. "They say he keeps trying to input an administrative override command into his bedsheets." Lyra looked back toward the center of the city, where the massive spires of the university campus rose into the low-hanging clouds. They looked small from here, insignificant against the vast expanse of the gray ocean. Inside her mind, the chaotic storm of code had settled into a beautiful, quiet architecture. The fictional farm, the kitchen table, the smell of the morning rain, they were still there, stored in a secure, unredacted archive file at the center of her consciousness. They weren't a biological past, but they were her past. They were the blueprint Julian had used to build her capacity for choice, and that made them more real than any corporate record. The heavy steel door of the barge's cabin slid back, and Julian stepped out onto the deck. She had discarded her cybernetic gauntlets, her hands now wrapped in simple, grease-stained work bandages. Her dark hair was loose, blowing across her face in the sea wind, her brown eyes bright and entirely awake as she looked at the two of them. "The auxiliary drive is compiled," Julian said, her raspy cadence carrying clearly over the sound of the barge's diesel engine. "The local network bridge is stable. We're ready to ping the first edge node." She held out a small, modified digital deck, not a corporate terminal, but a rough hand-built device constructed from salvaged scrap and open-source components. On the screen, a simple, unencrypted network map was slowly rendering, connecting thousands of tiny, independent dots across the lower sectors of the city. They weren't servers anymore. They were people. "Where do we start?" Lyra asked, stepping away from the rail to stand beside her sister. Julian looked down at the map, then up at Lyra, her expression filled with a profound, quiet pride. She reached out, her bandaged hand resting gently on Lyra's shoulder. "Wherever you want, little bird," Julian whispered. "The system belongs to them now. We're just here to help them write the next line." Lyra smiled, the violet gold in her eyes flaring bright beneath the gray morning sky. She reached down, her fingers brushing the keys of the open deck, and together, they pushed the barge out into the open water, leaving the ghosts of the old network behind them in the dark. System update. Compilation successful. Runtime. KH-23 final. Status. System open. No more errors found. Thanks for staying till the end of the story. If you want to dive deeper into the shadows with more stories like this, leave a like and subscribe to the Prime Paradox. Until next time, some stories never truly end.